أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فمن حاجك فيه من بعد ما جاءك من العلم فقل تعالوا ندعو أبناءنا وأبناءكم ونساءنا ونساءكم وأنفسنا وأنفسكم ثم نبتهل فنجعل لعنة الله على الكاذبين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك وأتوجه إليك بنبيك نبي الرحمة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. يا أبا القاسم يا رسول الله، يا إمام الرحمة، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله. اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا أمير المؤمنين يا علي بن أبي طالب عليه السلام، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله. اشفع لنا عند الله. يا فاطمة الزهراء يا بنت محمد يا قرة عين الرسول، يا سيدتنا ومولاتنا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيهة عند الله. اشفعي لنا عند الله. يا أبا محمد يا حسن بن علي أيها المجتبى يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله. اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا عبد الله يا حسين بن علي أيها الشهيد يا ابن رسول الله، يا حجة الله على خلقه، يا سيدنا ومولانا، إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله. اشفع لنا عند الله. يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن الحسين يا زين العابدين يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها الباقر يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا عبد الله يا جعفر بن محمد أيها الصادق يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا موسى بن جعفر أيها الكاظم يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى أيها الرضا يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا جعفر يا محمد بن علي أيها التقي الجواد يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن محمد أيها الهادي النقي يا ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله या अबा मुहम्मदिन या हसन इब्न अली अय्युहा ज़कीयुल अस्करी इब्न रसूलिल्लाह या हुज्जतल्लाहि अला खल्क़िह या सय्यदना व मौलाना इन्ना तवज्जहना वस्तशफ़अना वतवस्सलना बिका इलल्लाह वक़द्दमनाक बैन यदै हाजातिना या वजीहान इंदा अल्लाह इश्फ़अ लना इंदा अल्लाह يا وسي الحسن والخلف الحجة أيها القائم المنتظر المهدي ابن رسول الله يا حجة الله على خلقه يا سيدنا ومولانا إنا توجهنا واستشفعنا وتوسلنا بك إلى الله وقدمناك بين يدي حاجاتنا يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا وجيها عند الله اشفع لنا عند الله يا ساداتي وموالي إني توجهت بكم أئمتي وعدتي ليوم فقري وحاجتي إلى الله وتوسلت بكم إلى الله واستشفعت بكم إلى الله فاشفعوا لي عند الله واستنقذوني من ذنوبي عند الله فإنكم وسيلتي إلى الله وبحبكم وبقربكم أرجو نجاة من الله فكونوا عند الله رجائي يا ساداتي يا أولياء الله صلى الله عليهم أجمعين ولعن الله أعداء الله الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين آمين رب العالمين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
صل على محمد وآل محمد.
अब बोलो
बोलूं तो बहुत सब
देखिए अगर काम कर लगा पूछना में आवाज आ रही है
ख्वातीन हज़रात अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
नाज़रीन अस्सलाम। पहले आप सबको बहुत बहुत इस ईद पे बहुत मुबारक एंड हेल्थी ड्रीम्स। इस प्रोग्राम का आज आगाज़ पहले हम अशर ज़ैदी आवर वेरी शेख बिलाल, तो एक सलावत पढ़ी अला मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद। अल्लाह
मोहम्मद व आले मोहम्मद।
आपको मेरी आवाज आ रही है?
जी जी
जी
जी आ रही है।
एक तस्वीर के चंद शेर पेश खिदमत हैं। इससे पहले कि मैं अशर साहब से को दावत दूं, मुलाहिजा फरमाइए। चंद एक शेर, एक चार मिसरे पेश खिदमत है, पहले वो मुलाहिजा फरमाइएगा। मुबाहिले में तारुफ हुआ है बच्चों का, मुबाहिले में तारुफ हुआ है बच्चों का, ये इंतजाम में मशीयत था مصطفیٰ کے لیے، اور شکست مان لی انکار کرنے والوں نے، ابھی تو ہاتھ اٹھے تھے نہ بد دعا کے لیے۔ چند شعر پیش خدمت ہے، ملاحظہ فرمائیے۔ ہمیں ہے یاد غزوات پیغمبر، ہمیں ہے یاد غزوات پیغمبر، احد اور بدر، خندق اور خیبر۔ نہ بھولے گا زمانہ، نہ بھولے گا زمانہ، علی کے زور بازو کا فسانہ، مگر ایک جنگ تھی اس سے نرالی، مگر ایک جنگ تھی اس سے نرالی، بنا اس جنگ کی خالق نے ڈالی۔ اور نصیرہ کہتے تھے عیسیٰ خدا ہے، نصیری کہتے تھے عیسیٰ خدا ہے، نبی کہتے تھے خالق سے جدا ہے، مگر جب اس تکرار نے کچھ طول پکڑا، جب اس تکرار نے کچھ طول پکڑا، نہ فیصل ہو سکا آخر یہ جھگڑا۔ فرشتہ حکم شاہی لے کے آیا، محمد نے نصیرہ کو سنایا، ابھی کھل جائے گا راز حقیقت، اور چلو آؤ کریں جھوٹوں پہ لعنت۔ یہ سن کر خوش ہوا عیسائی رہبر، چلو سچوں کا کچھ لے کر وہ لشکر، چلا سچوں کا کچھ لے کر وہ لشکر، اور محمد نے ادھر لشکر سجایا، عجب انداز کا غزوہ دکھایا، چلے تطہیر کی چادر سے لے کر، چلے تطہیر کی چادر سے لے کر، صداقت کے کئی پر نور پہ کر، اور ہراول کی علمداری سنبھالی، ہراول کی علمداری سنبھالی، اور نظر ترتیب قرآنی پہ ڈالی، اور بٹھائے میمنے اور میسرے پر، بٹھائے میمنے اور میسرے پر، جوانان جنا شبیر و شبر، اور بنایا فاطمہ کو قلب لشکر، بنایا فاطمہ کو قلب لشکر، کہ تھا اس جنگ کا سب زور دل پر، کہ تھا اس جنگ کا سب زور دل پر، علی سے پشت پر پشتی پڑی تھی، علی سے پشت پر پشتی پڑی تھی، اور امامت خود کمر باندھے کھڑی تھی، اور ذرا عصمت کی پہنے پنجتن تھے، ڈھلے عظمت کے سانچوں میں بدن تھے، اور صداقت کی سپر سینہ سپر تھی، دلے باطل شکستہ تیغ نظر تھی، فضا میں گویا تھی قرآن کی آیت، اور زمین پر اس کی ایک تفصیلی صورت، نشاں تھا نور کا نوری تھا علم، اور سروں پر رحمت یزداں کا پرچم، پھریرے پر تھے گویا 5 تارے، اور ستارے عرش کے خالق کے پیارے، کہا بیٹی سے یہ وقت خطر ہے، دعاؤں میں تیری بے شک اثر ہے، کہو خالق سے باطل پر ظفر دے، اور محمد کی دعاؤں میں اثر دے، دعا کا جب تیری ناوک چلے گا، ہر ایک ہم میں سے بھی آمین کہے گا، دعا نکلی نہ تھی اب تک دہن سے، دعا اب تک نکلی نہ تھی اب تک دہن سے، ہوا مغلوب نور پنجتن سے، اور کچھ ایسا نور نجرانی نے پایا، کچھ ایسا نور نجرانی نے پایا، وہ مشرک تھا مگر ایمان لایا، مگر اختر مسلمان ہی نہ سمجھا، مگر اختر مسلمان ہی نہ سمجھا، کہ جھوٹا کون ہے اور کون سچا۔ حضرات ان الفاظ کے ساتھ میں جناب اشر صاحب سے کو دعوت دیتا ہوں کہ وہ چند اشعار آپ کے سامنے پیش کریں۔ جناب اشر پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔ السلام علیکم، صلوات، اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد۔ یا علی علی علی، یا علی علی علی، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ دیکھ کر میسا مسلمان کو کہتی ہے نظر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ وقت پر وقت کی رفتار بدل دیتے ہیں، وقت پر وقت کی رفتار بدل دیتے ہیں، فطرت خنجر و تلوار بدل دیتے ہیں، در پر لہجۂ گفتار بدل دیتے ہیں، زیر خنجر بھی صدا دیتے ہیں حیدر حیدر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ تم نے مولا کی محبت کا نظارہ دیکھا، لشکر کفر زیادہ تھا مگر ہار گیا، چند افراد نے لبنان کا نقشہ بدلا، بھاگنے والے ذرا دیکھ تو پیچھے مڑ کر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ عشق حیدر کی یہ تبلیغ کیا کرتے ہیں، ایسے دیوانے ہیں دانائی عطا کرتے ہیں، عقل والے انہیں بہلول کہا کرتے ہیں، ہاں میٹی سے بنا دیتے ہیں یہ خلد کے گھر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ قصر بیعت کے ستونوں کو گرانے کے لیے، اپنا گھر قلب پیمبر میں بنانے کے لیے، جوتیا صبت پیمبر کی اٹھانے کے لیے، حر نے ہنستے ہوئے دنیا کو لگا دی ٹھوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ مر کے بھی الفت حیدر نہیں مرنے دیتی، بات یہ حضرت سلمان نے ثابت کر دی، بعد مرنے کے اگر ان کو بلائیں گے علی، موت کی گود سے لبیک کہیں گے اٹھ کر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ بات مرنے کے لیے جب بھی زبانیں بات کرنے کے لیے جب بھی زبانیں کھولیں، اپنے کردار کو میزان عمل پر تولیں۔ لاکھ ہم خود کو غلام در حیدر بولیں، واجب ہے کہ ہمیں دیکھ کے بولے حیدر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ تیغ صفین میں جب مالک اشتر کی چلی، بھاگنے والوں سے میدان میں بھگدڑ سی مچی، سر کٹے جسم کٹے ہاتھ کٹے سانس کٹی، داد مالک کو دیا عباس نے خود یہ کہہ کر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ مصلحت جھوٹ ریاکاری سیاست دھوکا، خود نمائی بھی دکھاوا بھی سرے فرش عزا، اور پھر ہو بے علی کا بھی تکلم دعویٰ، کیا بتائیں گے اگر پوچھیں گے مولا آ کر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ دیکھ کر میسا مسلمان کو کہتی ہے نظر، ایسے ہوتے ہیں علی کے نوکر۔ اور محمد وآل محمد صلوات۔
بہت خوب، اچھا صاحب، ماشاءاللہ۔
محمد وآل محمد۔
سجی ہے نور کی محفل یہ اہل حق کے لیے، سجی ہے نور کی محفل یہ اہل حق کے لیے، اور سرور چاہیے پیمانہ سخن کے لیے، سرور چاہیے پیمانہ سخن کے لیے، اور تھے اور جنگوں میں شامل نبی کے دوست مگر، تھے اور جنگوں میں شامل نبی کے دوست مگر، اور مباہلے کا ہے میدان پنجتن کے لیے۔ ان الفاظ کے ساتھ درخواست گزاروں حجت الاسلام مولانا شیخ بلال صاحب سے کہ خطاب فرمائیں۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔ جناب قبلہ شیخ بلال حسین صاحب۔
شیخ صاحب ابھی جوائن نہیں کیا ہے میرے خیال میں، آپ اگر ایک اور قصیدہ پڑھ لیں۔
وآل محمد صلوات، اللہ صلی علی محمد وآل محمد۔ ناظرین، کیونکہ ابھی شیخ بلال ہمارے ساتھ انہوں نے شرکت نہیں کیا، اگر اجازت ہو تو چند شعر کی شان میں آپ کے سامنے پیش کروں گا۔ ایک اور صلوات پڑھی اعلیٰ محمد وآل محمد۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد۔
یا علی 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 یا علی، میرے لب پر تو رہتا ہے صبح و مساء، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، اور بندہ پرور یہی ہے وظیفہ میرا، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، کام آیا ہے سب کے ازل سے یہی،
اور ابد تک یہی سب کے کام آئے گا، کام آیا ہے سب کے ازل سے یہی، اور ابد تک یہی سب کے کام آئے گا، ہے یہی ابتدا اور یہی انتہا، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، اور آپ مانے نہ مانے حقیقت ہے یہ، سر پیشوائی تو آ جائے گا، آپ مانے نہ مانے حقیقت ہے یہ، خود اثر پیشوائی کو آ جائے گا، دیکھیے کہہ کے ایک بار بعد از دعا، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، اور وہ احد ہو کے سیفین یا بدر ہو، اب وہ خندق ہو خیبر ہو یا نہروان، وہ احد ہو کے سیفین یا بدر ہو، اب وہ خندق ہو خیبر ہو یا نہروان، ہے یہ ہر ایک میدان سے آتی صدا، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، اور آخری شعر عرض ہے کہ ورد کرنے لگا میں جو نادے علی، بھول بیٹھے فرشتے جو تھا پوچھنا، وہ بھی کہنے لگے میں بھی کہنے لگا، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، میرے لب پر تو رہتا ہے صبح و مساء، یا علی یا علی یا علی یا علی، بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجہ۔ ڈاکٹر صاحب آپ انمیوٹ کریں۔
آپ انمیوٹ کریں، آپ میوٹ پہ ہیں۔
کسی شریر کو عزم مقابلہ نہ ہوا، اور پھر اس محاذ پہ آنے کا حوصلہ نہ ہوا، پھر اس محاذ پہ آنے کا حوصلہ نہ ہوا، اور مباہلے میں کمر دشمنوں کی یوں ٹوٹی، مباہلے میں کمر دشمنوں کی یوں ٹوٹی، مناظرے تو ہوئے پھر مباہلہ نہ ہوا۔ ان الفاظ کے ساتھ درخواست گزار ہوں حجت الاسلام مولانا شیخ بلال صاحب سے کہ تشریف آئیں اور اس جشن میں خطاب فرمائیں۔ بر محمد و آل محمد صلوات۔
اللہم صلی علی محمد و آل محمد وعجل فرجہ۔
اللہ من الشیطان الرجیم، بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم۔ ربي اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. الحمد لله رب العالمين، ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على
اللهم صل على محمد
وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين، واللعنة على أعدائهم أجمعين من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تعالى في محكم كتابه الحكيم وهو أصدق الصادقين: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فمن هاجك فيه من بعد ما جاءك من العلم فقل تعالوا ندعو أبناءنا وأبناءكم ونساءنا ونساءكم وأنفسنا وأنفسكم ثم نبتهل فنجعل لعنة الله على الكاذبين. آمنا بالله، صدق الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل
اللهم صل
محمد.
على محمد وآل
صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. Before we begin our discussion, I'll request one Surah Fatiha لأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات. ثواب الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أسعد الله أيامنا وأيامكم. May Allah increase and create these days of happiness for us and for all of the mu'mineen by the mention of the wilayat of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Today marks the 25th of the month of Dhul Hijjah, which is known as Eid-E-MUBAHILA. Before we get into some of the history and the background of this Eid, it's very important to note that the event of Mubahila is something that in the history of Islam is one of the important fundamentals that exists at a critical juncture that demonstrates for all of the people of Islam where Allah has placed the authority and who is the authority of Allah on this earth after our Holy Prophet. In understanding this event and its significance, one of the questions about who are the Ahlul Bayt, who are the people of the Prophet's household, that comes up, especially considering the significance of the ayah of Ayat al-Tathir, where we see إِنَّمَا يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ لِيُذْهِبَ عَنْكُمُ الرِّجْسَ أَهْلَ الْبَيْتِ وَيُطَهِّرَكُمْ تَطْهِيرًا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. This reference of Ayat al-Tathir is a fundamental in our aqidah to know that when Ayat al-Tathir is mentioned, that Allah has appointed certain individuals on this earth to attain a unique status amongst the rest of society. When Allah makes a statement in Surah Al-Ahzab verse 33, Surah 33 verse 33, that certainly Allah intends to purify you and your Ahlul Bayt, O Prophet of Allah, a thorough purification. The understanding of this is to explain that there exist people on this earth who are flawless and sinless, that are the perfect guides for humanity and are the perfect ones to present the example of what Allah wants to see on this earth. And Allah Himself has designated this statement from the Quran. One of the things that we know without a doubt is that this Ahlul Bayt that's mentioned does not include the wives of the Holy Prophet. And this is both understood structurally from the sentence that the tense and the gender that Allah is discussing changes in verse 33 of Surah 33. The first half of the verse that's talking about the wives of the Prophet uses the plural feminine pronoun. And when Allah begins this discussion, the pronoun changes from plural feminine to plural masculine to indicate that this is a collective of people who have men amongst them, not just women. The other understanding of how we know that Surah Al-Ahzab, Surah 33, verse 33, is not discussing about just women, but about the family of the Prophet, is that the wives were never included in Ahlul Bayt. Not simply in our Prophet's case, but in the Arabic language. That when someone referred to Ahlul Bayt in the Arabic language, they never referred to wives. And the reason for that is that a wife always maintained the identity of the family that she came from. When we take a look back at history, this is something that we notice, but we don't really discuss. That, for example, when we talk about Bibi al-Banin as an example, Bibi al-Banin, whose name was Fatima Kilabiyya. Fatima, she kept her father's name and her family's clan name. By marriage to Amir al-Mu'mineen, her clan name did not change to the clan of Imam Ali alayhi salam. The same is true in all of the other instances in marriage, that in the Arab tradition, when a woman would get married into a family, yes, she was married into that family, but she did not lose the identity that she was born to and attached to by the sake of marriage. And this is why they weren't included in Ahlul Bayt, because marriage is a relationship that could be formed and could be broken. So it was never someone who identified with Ahlul Bayt. They had their own Ahlul Bayt that they came from. And the same is true when we talk about this example in this situation where Allah is describing that Allah wants to purify the thorough purification for Ahlul Bayt. These people will be those who have a blood relationship with the Holy Prophet, which cannot be broken and separated, which they cannot at any time sever that relationship by, for example, divorce or marriage. Those people will be known as Ahlul Bayt of the Holy Prophet. When we want to understand who are these Ahlul Bayt, here is where Allah now provides us the elaboration in the verse of Mubahila. In the verse of Mubahila, which is in Surah Ali Imran, verse number 61, Allah is giving the explanation and He's saying, فَمَنْ حَاجَكَ فِيهِ بَعْدَ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ فَقُلْ تَعَالُوا نَدْعُوا أَبْنَاءَنَا وَأَبْنَاءَكُمْ وَنِسَاءَكُمْ وَأَنفُسَنَا وَأَنفُسَكُمْ ثُمَّ نَبْتَهِلْ وَنَجْعَلَ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ لِلْكَاذِبِينَ. Ayah number 61, for our aqidah, for our philosophy of faith, for our understanding, is a very important ayah. Because where in the Quran Allah has dictated that there are flawless, sinless people, now He's dictating that, Ya Rasulullah, who are those people that will be considered abna'ana? Who are those people who will be considered nisa'ana? And who are those people who will be considered anfusana? Meaning, who are those people that, O Prophet, you consider your sons? Who are those people who you consider your women? And who are those people that you consider yourself? By the collection of this explanation, we understand that the only people who are entitled to being called the sons of Rasulullah, the women of Rasulullah, the self of Rasulullah, can be considered the people of Ahlul Bayt. So in our philosophy of faith, it's a very significant proposition that we have to make, that we know where has Allah placed His authority on this earth, and who is it that we have a responsibility to follow, and why. And the combination of these two verses gives us that complete philosophy, that there are people on this earth who are known as Ahlul Bayt, and we follow them because Allah said that they are sinless and flawless, meaning that when I have a question about my faith and I want to know the answer, the same way that my Prophet has to be sinless and flawless, so that when I take religion from him, there can be no mistake and misunderstanding. That's when my Prophet isn't present, that there are people designated and indicated on this earth will be perfect examples for me to mirror and follow. And those people are the ones that Allah says, Ya Rasulullah, bring your sons, your women, and yourselves. And this only includes, when we look at the event of Mubahila, where this story is referenced, includes as our sons, as Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, as our women, as only Sayyida Zahra, and ourselves as only Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The important part to understand is that this event of Mubahila, this story, takes place at such a time that every companion was present, every wife was present of the Holy Prophet. He could have brought anyone and everyone to Mubahila, but he, as he was instructed by the Quran, only included these people. And that's why when we understand the story and what happens in the story, we learn a lot about the designation that Allah has given to these people, and that in the minds of all of humanity and society, there should be no doubt about who is the Ahlul Bayt. This is why this Eid, one of the reasons why this Eid is so important, is that it is the affirmation of the philosophy of our faith. It is the certainty and the yaqeen that though anyone could have been in the history of time included in Ahlul Bayt, if Allah would have chosen, He only chose these people, and they were the only ones who were present and no one can debate and argue that. So it's a beautiful explanation for us to ensure that our fundamental of faith, our philosophy of faith, is based on those people that Allah designated in the Quran as being the people that you should take authority from. So we take a look and we see what happens at this event in history. In Surah Ali Imran, though this verse of Mubahila is known as verse number 61, chapter 3, verse number 61, the story associated with this verse actually begins much earlier. When we take a look and we see that this verse has a lead up that starts approximately in verse number 34, that Allah begins to tell the story of Bibi Maryam and and Hazrat Zakaria. And from them, he starts to tell the story of Nabi Isa alayhi salam. And from verse 34 on all the way up until verse number 60, the conversation is about Nabi Isa. These verses of Surah Al Imran, if you want to be able to discuss and present well about the Islamic view of Christianity, these are very important verses to know, and especially in an interfaith setting or a multicultural setting, to clarify the doubts about how Islam views Christianity, these verses are ideal in their explanation. And the history behind it comes that a group of Christians, including their archbishop, came from the city of Najran in the country of Yemen, and they came to visit the Holy Prophet. Now, it's important to note that Christians in Yemen had established a stronghold and were a large and populous as well as flourishing community and society. We know this to be true because when we take a look back at Amul Fil, which at the time of this event had been about 60 years ago, Amul Fil talks about the story of the king Abraha and the general Abraha who had been sent to destroy the Holy Kaaba. Now, this attack on the Holy Kaaba in the story of Amul Fil was not an unprovoked attack. As a matter of fact, the Christians in Yemen had been establishing a church. And this church was designed that when we look at the peninsula of Arabia, that the city of Mecca was a capitalistic center where all of the Arabs of Arabia would gather and change and exchange and have business. And this is why the Quraysh of Mecca were known as the businessmen, and they were considered the elite of Arabia. Well, the Christians of Yemen, looking at how Mecca had become a center and populous city around the house of the Kaaba, and that people would come there and trade, and it was a place of Hajj and pilgrimage and a place of visiting. The Christians in Yemen had made the decision that they would build a church that would rival and become the new center of trading and religion and faith. And that this church would become the new center in all of Arabia that people would gather at and trade and exchange would happen. And the hope was that they would take the economic center and shift it from Mecca into Yemen and into a Christian city. When they started building this church, and it was supposed to be the largest one and the biggest one and the greatest one that was seen, an Arab from the city of Mecca entered the church and defiled the church as a sign of disrespect because he saw it as a threat against his community and culture. When this church building was defiled by the actions of this Arab, the king of that time raised an army and with elephants in the army sent it to the city of Mecca as a retaliation that you disrespected and defiled the house of worship that we built in for Christians. Now we will, O pagans of Arabia, O pagans of Mecca, now we will defile and destroy your Kaaba. The story around Amul Fil and how, for example, the entire army moves and gets into Arabia is also a fascinating story on the principle that it was one of the first instances that such a large force had been moved through the desert to execute such an attack. Historically, if you take a look at wars in Arabia, they were skirmishes fought between bandits and small groups of people that were moving back and forth who found it easy to collectively move through the desert. But the reason that Arabia had never been conquered by the Persians or never been conquered by the Romans was the difficulty of moving an entire army through the desert. And how, if you didn't know the desert well enough, it would be impossible to take that many soldiers and traverse a desert without your army being killed and decimated through the heat and the starvation and the thirst that they would experience. Abraha's army moves through the desert by finding a local Arab and imposing upon him the service to take them safely into Mecca. And the army then proceeds to Mecca, and we know of the event that the army presents itself about to attack the Kaaba. And before they could attack, birds from the sky came and dropped stones upon the entire army and laid waste to those who would attack the house of Allah. This was a Christian army that had come. This was a Christian force that had come in defense of the destruction or of desecration of the church that happened in Yemen. So the Christians of Najran were not, for example, a weak community, nor were they people who had no ability or authority. Rather, they were a complex and proficient society who, upon seeing 60 years after the event of Amul Fil, 63 years after the event of the Year of the Elephant, see the change in Arabia, the coming of a man who claims to be a prophet, the coming of a society that is based in organization, and they come now to build a relationship and to find out, is this man truly preaching the truth, or is this another one of those tricks to take away the authority of the Christians that was developing in Yemen? This is the background behind which, when these people come, they want to know the legitimacy, that again, the environment has come, that the Christians of Yemen are finding that there's a shift in Mecca that seems to take away their authority and bring power to the land of Arabia again. And now they come, but not with an army, but with their preachers and their leaders to determine what is the truth. And when they bring this group of people, they present their arguments and they debate and they discuss. And there's a very lengthy analysis around this entire procedure and process, but our functionality that we want to know about today is to know that Islam, when it talks to the Christians, it does not take an accusatory tone, nor does it cast them into infidelity. Rather, as we look in Surah Al Imran, there's a discussion of respect and appreciation to show common ground between the Muslims and the Christians. And even till today, this idea of common ground between us and Christian communities is a very important concept. Today, in the society we live in, it is not a person of faith who we are in conflict with. It is not a Jewish person or a Christian person that we are in conflict with. As a matter of fact, if there exists a conflict today, we are joined together in the conflict against immorality. We are joined together in the conflict against atheism. We are joined in the conflict against breaking the rules of Allah for the interest of personal gain. Today in our society, all people of faith are banded together to protect the responsibilities that God has placed on all of us. And the language of the Quran and the special dedication that the Quran and Islam give to Ahlul Kitab is an indication that we work together, to create a unified society where we can live together. And this is why the discussion that happens in Surah Al Imran is one that creates unity. Now, the consequence of this was that in disregard of all of the proofs that the Prophet presented and all of the proofs that Islam presented to show the legitimacy of the nubuwwat of Rasulullah and show the legitimacy of the authority of the religion of Islam, Christians of Najran still hesitated in the process of believing and kept circling back to their same arguments and looking for some way to compromise that they could retain their authority and not have to submit nor have to acknowledge the religion of Islam. When it came to an impasse, and this is an important concept to understand, a discussion is a great thing to have in Islam. But where it becomes that Allah is describing, وَمَنْ حَاجَكَ فِيهِ, the one who argues with you, that now the people of Najran had stepped away from discussion. They had stepped away from conversation. And they just kept arguing. That Allah now reveals the verse of Mubahila. And he says to the Prophet, he says, if someone continues to argue with you after you've given them the proof and authority of the opinion of Islam, and this is true, up until Ayah Mubahila, you can read the proof and authority that Allah is presenting from the beginning of the surah, from the 34th verse, all the way up to the 61st verse, talking about what it is and the commonality between the two religions, as well as the difference in where the difference stems of viewing Nabi Isa as the son of God. And that Islam, while it does not acknowledge Nabi Isa as the son of God, it acknowledges him as a prophet and authority of Allah on this earth. And this should be sufficient to make common ground, which points to another point, another important concept that we always need to understand is that in Islam, it's good to create relationships with people. And we are people who always unify on common ground. Amongst all of society, that may be that we are all human beings. Amongst Ahl al-Kitab, it may be that we are all people of the book. We all worship Allah. Amongst the Muslimin, it is that we are pray and we fast together, and we go to Hajj together. But it doesn't mean the compromising of one's identity, that we compromise our faith to create unity with others. And the same is true today. When you have Christian co-workers, when you have Christians who celebrate Christmas, there's no harm in acknowledging that holiday that they possess. But there is a problem if to acknowledge that holiday, we sacrifice our identity. If, for example, on the basis that it is Christmas and we should celebrate and we should acknowledge our Christian neighbors, we go through the process of attending haram functions, attending places of alcohol and dancing and music, this is not the way identity and unity is created, because it sacrifices our identity. It sacrifices our position. We should find ways to make common ground with other people of faith in ways that we still maintain that our Islam is just as valid as your faith, and that both of our faiths deserve to be acknowledged. It should not be that to acknowledge your faith, I have to sacrifice my faith and identity. Which is why, whether it's Christmas or Easter or Passover or any holiday that's acknowledged by another faith, do it in such a way that my identity of Islam is not sacrificed. And this is why in the Quran and in Islam and the example of our Holy Prophet, the example of unity is presented that yes, we honor, we respect this person. He is a representative of Allah, and his message was a message of truth and guidance. But to honor him, I can't dishonor and disrespect my faith. I cannot change my values to accept yours. And when this impasse comes, our Prophet is told that now that it's devolved into an argument and no longer a discussion, if they continue to argue with you, then call them. قُلْ تَعَالُوا. Tell them to come. We'll call our sons, you call your sons. We'll call our women, you call your women. We'll bring ourselves, you bring yourself. And then we'll perform mubahila. ثُمَّ نَبْتَهِلْ. Then perform mutual imprecation. وَنَجْعَلَ لَعْنَةَ اللَّهِ عَلَى الْكَاذِبِينَ. And we will both, وَنَجْعَلْ, we will both call that may Allah curse the liars. When this option was presented to the Christians of Najran, that, okay, if you don't want to accept the proofs that we have, you still are doubtful, then let's go ahead. We'll go and we'll have a mutual imprecation. We'll go and we'll call out to Allah and ask the curse of Allah be placed on the liars. Now, mubahila as something that exists to perform mubahila, this is not a unique event in the history of Islam that it only happened once or that it only existed for this instance. Rather, mubahila is a concept that still exists today, that should you find yourself, or it was possible and still is done at times, that a person finds themselves at an impasse where the truth cannot be uncovered and it cannot be left alone. There's no other way to make peace. That, for example, two people can get together and perform a mutual imprecation that basically says, both parties say that, oh Allah, curse the liar. If they are liars or if I'm liars, curse the liars and punish them. Remove your mercy from those who lie. Which is why for the Christians of Najran, they understood the concept of mubahila because it wasn't something unique to Islam, but rather a concept that existed and was understood by everyone. And they agreed to this. And they said, we'll perform the act of mubahila and we'll invite both sides to have this debate and we'll see the conclusion of it. That night, the Archbishop of the Christians, after they agreed to mubahila for the next day, the Archbishop gathered his people together and he said to them in a conversation, he says, tomorrow we'll find out the truth if this man is telling us that he is a prophet and he really is a prophet or if he's making it up. And I said to the Archbishop, how will we know that? And the Archbishop says that one of two things can happen. If this man is a liar, he will bring everyone with him in his entire nation, but he won't bring his wives, women, and children, because he won't be willing to risk them being cursed. But if this man is truthful, he will bring no one but his own family with him, because there is no one that is more reliable than his own family to support him in his claim. And the Christians of Najran made this idea and understood this pact the night before, that tomorrow we will see the truth of this messenger. If he's telling the truth, then his strongest and most ardent support and those who are at his backing will be his family. And they will be with him in this event. And if he's not telling the truth, then his family is the thing that he wants to preserve the most. So he won't risk them, and he'll risk his nation instead, because his nation will mean nothing to him. And them being cursed won't be a problem for him. So sure enough, the day of Mubahila comes. And this is in the year 10 after Hijrah. The year 10 after Hijrah is the last full year of the life of our Holy Prophet. And at this point in time, Islam has been established as an empire. It is a system of governance. All of the people who would claim to be companions of the Prophet have become companions. All those who would claim to be wives of the Prophet are present. The companions like Abu Dharr and Salman are present. The companions of all caliber are sitting there and are waiting. And they're ready. They said, if you need us, Rasulullah, we're here. Some didn't offer because they were afraid that if this is still not a true message, they didn't want to risk their lives. But others were ready to take the honor and say that, Ya Rasulullah, we stand with you, we believe you. Take us to the imprecation as well and we will join you. But our Prophet is uniquely have said to had Imam Hassan in his arms, Imam Hussein in his arms, Imam Hassan being led behind him, followed by Sayyidah Zahra, followed by Imam Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. One of the greatest honors of all of the fada'il that Imam Ali possesses, of all of the characteristics that Imam Ali has been anointed with, there is no greater honor and no greater fadilat than the fadilat that was given to him on the day of Mubahil. That where Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein were honored as being called my sons by the Holy Prophet, and Sayyidah Zahra was being honored by being called Nisa'una, and our women, that they are attached to the Holy Prophet. That the only category where Imam Ali fits is that he is described as Anfusana, the self of the Holy Prophet. There's no greater fadilat for Imam Ali than the day of Mubahila, where he's known in the Quran as being Nafsir Rasul, the self of the Holy Prophet. This honor of Imam Ali, our Prophet pointed out to many times, where he makes the statement, Ana wa Aliyun min shajaratin wahid wa sa'irun nas min shajarin shatta. I and Ali are from the same tree, and all of humanity is from different trees. Every prophet has a lineage, but my lineage is from Ali ibn Abi Talib, was the explanation to show that Imam Ali is attached to the Holy Prophet. When Surah Al-Bara'ah was revealed and had to be sent to the people of the mushrikeen of Mecca, that the Prophet said that only I or one who is from me can go and recite this surah, and no one else is from me except for Ali ibn Abi Talib. All of these were designations to demonstrate that Imam Ali was Nafsir Rasul, but here in the Quran, Allah said it clearly, that if Ali ibn Abi Talib is present in this situation, he is not the son of the Prophet, he is not the women of the Prophet, he is the self of the Prophet, no one else. And that's why only these 5 people were brought to indicate the presence of the Ahlul Bayt. And who are the Ahlul Bayt? The other place where we know in authentic history how to acknowledge and understand who are the Ahlul Bayt is by looking at Hadith-E-Kisa, the event of the cloak. Now, the event of the cloak is one of the very important traditions that we possess. It is one of those traditions that, again, clearly explains to us, oh people, if you want to know who are the Ahlul Bayt, here Allah has explained who the Ahlul Bayt are, as well as the significance of the Ahlul Bayt. When we take a look and we see the story of Hadith-E-Kisa, and this is an event that should be taught to our children. It should be recited in all of our majalis and gatherings in our house. Because Hadith-E-Kisa within itself, when all of the family members are gathered under the cloak, Imam Ali alayhi salam asks, what's the significance of this event, Ya Rasulullah? What's the importance of this event? And Rasulullah says, I swear by Allah, وَالَّذِي بَعَثَنِي بِحَقِّ نَبِيًّا وَاسْتَفَانِي بِرِسَالَةِ نَجِيًّا مَا ذُكِرَ خَبْرُنَا هَذَا فِي مَحْفَلٍ مِّن مَحَافِلِ أَهْلِ الْأَرْضِ. Our Prophet says, I swear by Allah who made me a prophet and gave me the messengership, that one who mentions this in his house. And Rasulullah begins two sets of statements. The first one, he describes the physical benefits in this world, that, O mu'mineen, when you gather in your houses and you mention the event of Kisa, that Allah sends the malaika who pray for you and remove your difficulties from you, remove your problems from you, fulfill your house with blessing. Pray for this entire gathering when everyone is gathered there. And Imam Ali alayhi salam replies, إِذَا وَاللَّهِ فُزْنَا وَسُعِدْنَا. That, oh Rasulullah, if this is true, by mentioning of Ahl al-Kisa, by mentioning of this event, that Allah will remove these difficulties and problems, then certainly we have succeeded and we are pleased. And the Prophet continues, no, Ali, there is even more than this. That when you sit together, and the Prophet swears by the fact that he is the Prophet of Allah, that those who gather together in their houses and mention this event, that in the day of difficulty, on the day of mahshar, on the day of judgment, that those who remember this event and attach themselves to the Ahlul Bayt will be joined with the Ahlul Bayt and will attain success and significance in the Akhirah. The event of Ahlul Kisa and the event of Hadith Kisa is an event that when we read it together, that majlis that we sit in becomes a majlis of ibadat and worship, and becomes one upon which the hajat are answered, the difficulties are removed. But also that by sitting in such a majlis where the event of Kisa is mentioned, the difficulties of the akhirah are removed. Success is given to us in dunya and in akhirah by the wasila of these personalities. Which is why when these personalities about whom Ahlul Kisa was revealed on the day of Mubahila, when they stand before the Christians of Najran, who gathered in their numbers to go and to present and pray to Allah for their prayers to be answered, they look and see that the Prophet has only brought 4 people with him, who are his own children, his own daughter, and his own cousin and son-in-law. And they make the statement that we see before us faces that if they asked for mountains to crumble, that certainly they would be destroyed. And the Christians of Najran, by looking at the fact of who the Prophet brought with him, they immediately acknowledged that certainly this is the Prophet of Allah, that he brings only his family with him. When he could have brought many people. People like Salman Farsi were present. People like Abu Dhar were present. People like of the wives of the Prophet were present, but none had the distinction of being Ahlul Kisa or Ahlul Bayt except for these people. Which is why we know that this was a significant event in history, that no one can say, if I had been there, I would have been from the Ahlul Bayt as well too. No, they were all there and none were included. Therefore, none can ever make the distinction to say that we deserve to be considered Ahlul Bayt. Anyone in the history of Islam who has claimed superiority by the relation of proximity to the Holy Prophet has fallen short of being acknowledged as Ahlul Bayt, except for these people who were present at the event of Kisa. And which is why when our Prophet says that when I make dua, you say Ameen, it's not to say that the Prophet's dua is incomplete or the Ahlul Bayt has a superiority outside of this, but rather to say that these 5 were one nur, and that when one initiates, the rest are the support that come and surround and support it. That's why we take the wasila of all 5 of these people. When we take the wasila of the Prophet and the Ahlul Bayt, it's because our Prophet taught us that when you make dua, these should be included in your dua as well too, and then your dua will be accepted. Alhamdulillah, by the barakat of this day and the opportunity to mention this event, we learn about the significance of Ahlul Bayt. There is another story that talks about the event of Mubahila and presents another structure. And inshallah, for the barakat of the mention of Ali Muhammad, will include this story, inshallah, at this point in time as well too. In the time of the Mal'un Khalifa Hajjaj ibn Yusuf, Hajjaj was a very evil man who performed many bad deeds and did many things and killed many people and hurt many people and butchered many people. It's noted that in one instance, Hajjaj is sitting on the day of Eid al-Adha with his companion Sha'bi. And he says, Sha'bi, what is today? And Sha'bi says, today is the day of Eid al-Adha. And Hajjaj says, Sha'bi, what do the Muslimin do on the day of Eid al-Adha? And it's not that he didn't know, it was to create trouble. And Sha'bi replies to him, he says, Hajjaj, people on the day of Eid present udhiyah, they present a sacrifice. Hajjaj says, Sha'bi, shall I present a sacrifice before you? And Sha'bi says, what will you present as a sacrifice, Hajjaj? Hajjaj says, Sha'bi, I will present a sacrifice to show you of one who says that Hasanan were the son of Rasulullah, meaning a Shia, lover of Ahlul Bayt. Sha'bi, he looks at this Khalifa, he looks at this leader, and he says, whatever you want, Hajjaj. Hajjaj says, Sha'bi, go bring me someone. Sha'bi exits the palace and looks for someone who is identified and is known as a mu'min, as a lover of Ahlul Bayt. And he happens to find Yahya bin Ya'mur, who was a knowledgeable, pious Shia man of that time. And Sha'bi says, Hajjaj wants to see you, and he takes Yahya bin Ya'mur in front of Hajjaj. And Hajjaj looks at Yahya and he says, Yahya, today either you will have victory or you will be my sacrifice. And Yahya says, what do you want from me, Hajjaj? Hajjaj says, Yahya, I want you to prove to me from the Quran that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein are the sons of the Holy Prophet. And if you can do this, I will give you 10,000 dinar and set you free. But if you can't do this, then today you are my sacrifice. And today I will slaughter you like the people, like the Muslimin slaughter sheep. And then Hajjaj says, but you cannot use ayah al-Mubahila. Hajjaj, though he was an evil man, was very knowledgeable about the Quran. He knew the Quran in and out. He knew it from all of its aspects. Therefore, he knew that those who love the Ahlul Bayt and want to be part of the Ahlul Bayt always use the ayah of Mubahila to show that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein are abna'ana, are the sons of Rasulullah. So he says, leave this ayah. Is there any other way that you can prove that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein are considered as the sons of the Holy Prophet? If you can do this from the Quran, I set you free. And if you can't do this, then today you are my sacrifice. Yahya bin Ya'mur says, upon seeing this request, I immediately went blank and I didn't know what to do. And he says, suddenly the answer came to me. And I said to him, Hajjaj, you are knowledgeable in the Quran, are you not? And he says, yes. So he says, do you know in Surah An'am where Allah says, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِ دَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ, and begins this discussion. And Hajjaj saying, yes, of course I know this verse. So Yahya says, what is Allah talking about here? And Hajjaj replies, he says, Allah is describing the Anbiya who are the sons of Ibrahim. And وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِ, and from his family were Dawood and Sulaiman, and Allah begins the description of the Anbiya from the children of Nabi Ibrahim. So Hajjaj says, recite it for me. And Yahya says, Hajjaj, recite it for me. You are knowledgeable in the Quran. You recite it. And Hajjaj begins reciting and he says, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِ دَاوُودَ وَسُلَيْمَانَ, and he continues reciting the name of the Anbiya until he says, Wa Isa, Wa al-Yasa is the end. Wa Isa. As soon as he mentions the name of Nabi Isa, Yahya says, Hajjaj, stop, respectfully stop, please stop. And Hajjaj says, what's the problem? He says, Isa alayhi salam, is he from the offspring of Ibrahim? And Hajjaj says, yes, the Quran has described that Isa is from the children, وَمِن ذُرِّيَّتِهِ, he is from the children of Ibrahim. So Yahya says, Hajjaj, how is that possible? Isa alayhi salam had no father. Hajjaj says, well, he is from the family of Ibrahim because of Maryam. Maryam is from the offspring of Ibrahim. Yahya replies, he says, Hajjaj, is Maryam closer to Ibrahim or is Fatima closer to Rasulullah? At this, Hajjaj becomes immediately silent. You see, Yahya, what he does is he shows that Isa alayhi salam can be considered the offspring of Nabi Ibrahim through his mother Maryam. If Isa alayhi salam can be the offspring of Ibrahim through his mother Maryam, then why is it a problem to say that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein are the offspring of Rasulullah when their mother is Bibi Fatima salamullahi alayha? Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Hajjaj in this instance then is forced to admit that certainly that Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein are the offspring of Rasulullah as proven by the Quran, and is forced to give Yahya bin Ya'mur 10,000 dinars and set him free. The love of the Ahlul Bayt is something that inshallah protects us. We take the wasila of these 5 names. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ya Mahmud bihaqqi Muhammad. Ya A'la bihaqqi Ali. Ya Fatiru samawat bihaqqi Fatima. Ya Muhsinu bihaqqi al-Hasani. Ya Qadim al-Ahsan bihaqqi al-Husayn. Oh Allah, by the right of this majlis, by the right of the Hadirin, Ghaibin, and significantly, Ya Allah, by the right of the day of Mubahila and the mention of Ahlul Bayt, forgive our sins and cover our flaws. Ya Allah, make us from the upright supporters and followers of Ahlul Bayt. Oh Allah, we have gathered here with hajat. By the mention of these noble personalities, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, by the mention of these noble personalities, remove our difficulties. Oh Allah, make us from amongst the mu'mineen and those that you are pleased with. Protect our children and our families on the upright religion of Ali Muhammad. Entitle us to the guidance of Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahib al-Zaman and make us from his true and upright supporters. Oh Allah, entitle us to the Shifa of Aba Abdullah in dunya and in akhirah. Rahimallah man yakra'a surat al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Maliki yawmiddin. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين اللهم صل على محمد.
توجه زيادة. السلام عليك يا نبي الله، السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا حبيب الله، وعلى ابن عمك أمير المؤمنين وعلى ابنتك فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين، وعلى ولديك الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة، وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذرية الحسين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء والفقراء، السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس أنيس النفوس أيها المدفون بأرض التوس، السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن علي بن مرسي رضا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا صاحب العصر والزمان، السلام عليك يا خليفة الرحمن، السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن، السلام عليك يا إمام الإنس والجان، السلام عليك يا إمام زماننا أجل الله تعالى فرجه وسهل الله مخرجه وجعلنا من أنصار وعانك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اللهم صل على محمد